Hi, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Not-for-Profit, Navigating the Road to Financial Recovery. My name is Alison Mitchell, and I'm part of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce team. Before we start our webinar today, there are a few housekeeping items that I'd like to share. Your microphones should be muted, but if you could please double check to make sure that they are to reduce background noise, that would be appreciated. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar by typing the questions into the question box that you'll see in your control panel. Our presenter will be answering your questions at the end of the webinar. All webinar registrants will be receiving a follow-up email that will have a link to this webinar recording in it for your reference. Our presenter today is Kelly Hagen. Kelly is a partner with BDO Canada LLP in consulting as part of the advisory practice. Kelly is the not-for-profit industry leader and provides technology advisory services and implementation services to nonprofits and registered charities. Kelly has been a frequent speaker on technology trends, cloud strategies, and issues involving charity and not-for-profit organizations. She has a vast amount of experience supporting not-for-profits with navigating the technology trends and making the right decisions for their organizations. I would now like to invite Kelly to begin her presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Allison. Today I'm going to take you on a journey through navigating the road to financial recovery. As we all know, with the pandemic that's hit us, we've all been struggling to know sort of how to react and how to make sure we stay viable. So first off, let's just talk about some of the industry challenges. And these are challenges that have been identified to myself and colleagues as we've been talking to different clients within the not-for-profit sector. So finding time, is a challenge at most times, but in light of trying to deal with a crisis, we're too busy trying to take care of our immediate concerns to give us the ability to devise a strategy around COVID-19, which should include things like back to work strategies, staying viable, and business continuity and things like that. Secondly, having access to information. We found that a lot of the organizations within this sector, they sometimes are relying on financial information that maybe was from their year-end audit or maybe receiving the information several weeks after a month end. And right now, the ability to be able to forecast and have visibility to what's coming is more critical than it's ever been to be able to make informed business decisions. Some of our operational challenges can be as aligned with the social distancing and how we're going to make that work, how we're going to be able to stay viable with our mission or what our social service might be, has been putting us at risk on whether we can keep our business continuity going forward. Cash flow, of course, is a challenge, I think, across every organization, but in particular to the not-for-profit sector. We understand that you may not have cash reserves that can carry you for very long. And I've even heard it say that some organizations do have large cash reserves and they're earmarked for specific capital investments or things like that. And how do they message that to their constituents that money isn't necessarily there to be able to move forward? So it puts them at risk of maybe having to liquidate and things like that. And then lastly is kind of, I call this kind of the you don't know what you don't know kind of category, and that's you may not know what's available to you to address the impacts of COVID-19, and therefore you're struggling to even know where to start. So today, we're going to look at identifying what you should focus on and actively plan to mitigate those items. Leading your stakeholders to adapt to the changing landscape, whether that be minimizing cash and available credit to buy your organization time, understanding whether you should borrow or whether you should liquidate. Managing the workforce, it's a new world out there right now. A lot of remote workforce is in place, which posed some early challenges of getting access to information. Some organizations weren't equipped to even host virtual meetings, let alone access financial records or other information that they may need. And that brings along its own set of risks. And so understanding how to mitigate risks, not only with having a remote workforce, but also in terms of having a workforce that may be interacting with individuals if you happen to be in the healthcare space, or knowing how to not put your employees or the people that you're serving at risk through interactions. And then lastly, really understanding for your organization what the economy is looking like. What is the as we open the economy, and we're just today on the cusp of some early news from the provincial government around what can open and what they're looking at, and how our world is changing and adapting to things like curbside pickup. Is going to be important for you to follow. And then lastly, kind of considering your post-COVID operations, the decisions you make today are going to impact your future. So you want to be able to remain relevant, and you may have a digital impact because of that. And it means that you want to think through the decisions that you're making and not make rash decisions to get you over a small hump. You want to start thinking about, is this change that I have to incur going to take us far beyond the next 90 days? So we're going to explore some of those things. So let's talk about sort of some of the steps and some of the categories that you're going to go through. It pretty much starts with crisis management. We have a disruption of operations. We have government mandates. We're down to essential services, and trying to understand, are we an essential service? Are we eligible for any of the government subsidies? Are our operations actually disrupted to the level that we think they are, or are there ways that we can transform to stay in business and stay moving forward and supporting the needs that we have? Um, Obviously, economic impact, unemployment rates obviously soared. Some of you may or may not know that the not-for-profit sector in Canada makes up 10% of the workforce, so we have a significant impact on the workforce. So if the majority of our organizations are out of work, then there's a fairly strong economic impact there. So understanding how to get back into the workforce, make sure our people can come back to work, is important. Then, of course, managing and adapting to that workforce. I've seen lots of strategies and heard lots of communication around first, getting people remote, and trying to keep them working in that capacity as opposed to just not being able to work at all. And then adopting to what's going to be, new mandates within our office space. It may be that we have different shifts where we have groups of people only coming in on certain days of the week as opposed to everybody coming in on the same day. I've even heard of offices where they have sort of group A and group B, and they never cross over those two groups, so that they can share the office space. Risk is one that we never really like to talk about, but it could be risk of fraud, it could be risk of infection, it could be risk of business continuity, and there are others. But let's talk about fraud risk just for a second, in terms of that we've already been an industry that's been sort of targeted for fraud, especially around the cybersecurity. And so organizations may have been a little bit afraid of being online in the cloud, or even just the remote workers, thinking that there may be opening opportunity for further fraud. And although we've seen an increase in this kind of activity in terms of fraud risk with COVID-19, I think having a good plan, a good strategy, and being aware is half of the challenge there. Stability, as we move through sort of these different categories, we want to get to stability, which is resuming your operational stability. That means back to work strategy. It means starting to look at cost saving opportunities and revenue generating opportunities, how you might start to re-engage with donors and sponsors. All those things become very relevant to becoming stable. And then lastly, we want financial recovery. That is optimizing your organization to get back on track with your goals. You may have had some growth strategies in place for your organization that all got put on hold. You may have been ready to launch some new operational strategies or a new mission altogether. and they got put on hold. And in order to get back to financial recovery, you need to be back into that optimization stage. So let's talk about how we adapt and respond through these categories. So as we look at cash flow, workforce, cost savings, revenue opportunities, and digital transformation, I'd like to break each of these categories down for you and give you some really strategic and some thought-provoking ideas around what you should be thinking of in these categories. So if we think about cash flow, we want to look at subsidies and rebates and refunds. A couple of the strategies that I've heard here can be around, filing your HST rebates and returns, get that money flowing in. If there's any other kind of rebates or refunds that you can get from maybe booking an AGM and putting a deposit down that may not happen now. Or any other type of event, get those refunds back in so that the cash is in your pockets and not in somebody else's. Consider your lending sources. We don't want to condone over leveraging, but we do want to have you aware that there are lending sources that you may have available to you. They may be pre-established lines of credits. They could be different lending sources that you have available to you, but you should know what your options are as we start to understand the length of time that we may be in this. Cash equals time. So we want to make sure you can stay viable. Looking at your own cash reserves, as I mentioned earlier, is part of this process. You should know your runway with your cash reserves, even if it's 30 days or it's 60 days or it's 120 days, whatever that cash reserve runway looks like to you, have an understanding of it so that you can know how to react. And then lastly, just look at some of your insurance claims and contract exit clauses. We've been seeing a large uptake on the insurance claims. Initially, we heard a lot of insurance companies were just flat out saying no, that your insurance policy did not cover you for a pandemic, but it's been challenged in court a number of times already in terms of whether it's things that are out of your control have ceased to allow you to operate. Maybe you operate within another organization. An example that might be a childcare that runs within a school, and the school shut down by government mandate. Therefore, the childcare was not able to operate, even though they subsequently became part of the mandate as well. I can't say for sure if your insurance claims will be valid or not, but you should have somebody take a look at them if you're not 100% sure whether or not you can get a claim out of that. When we move over to looking at workforce, a couple of concepts that I want you to keep in mind is, maintaining your key resources. It's a little bit challenging to talk about level of resourcing, but every organization has sort of that group of resources that sort of run the show or particularly know the organization better than anybody else. Those key resources, you're going to want to try to have a good strategy. If you have to lay them off, the communication around making sure that you're going to be bringing them back to work or taking and leveraging the subsidies where available to keep them going is really going to be critical on the post back to work strategy because they're going to help you respond the quickest in terms of being able to get back up and going. Consider your vulnerable resources. You certainly don't want to put anybody at risk from a health position, but some of the mandates have been putting strains on different organizations. We certainly heard that in the long-term care facilities that contract workers or and nursing staff in particular couldn't move from facility to facility, and that was all for good reason. Certainly for their own health and for the health of the residents. But from a business perspective, it put a strain on the long-term care facilities in being able to staff properly, where they may have leveraged as there were peaks and valleys and breakouts, they may have needed more staff and they can't have resources coming from a different facility. And that actually caused the government to change the mandate around hospital healthcare workers and allowing them to move from hospitals to long-term care facilities to help. So thinking about different strategies around your resources and what some of these challenges may be around full-time capacity that you require to be able to operate. Um, Adopting the remote workplace, access collaboration tools. If you haven't considered your collaboration tools, or you maybe are adopting into things that are free, those are good tools in a lot of cases. I could name lots of them like Google Hangouts or Zoom or Microsoft Teams, but some of them provide a stronger backbone, a more secure platform than others do. So depending on whether you're dealing with vulnerable data, things like that, you might want to consider the level of security that you have around some of those collaboration tools. Working from home can be very, very safe. You just have to make sure that you have, the right tools in place to make that collaboration work for you. And then it's important to start having that back to work strategy. And we're seeing a lot of organizations that haven't really thought of this. They just kind of think, okay, we're going to go in and turn the lights on. But you're going to be dealing with, some of it might be, around the mental health of your workers. Are they comfortable? Are they afraid? Are they unsure of what they're coming back to? Do we have the ability to put social distancing in within the office space if that's what we're doing? And potentially, do we even need the amount of office space that we have, right? So putting a strategy in place that looks for the back to work and beyond, more than just the opening the doors, and really into what our operations are going to look like for the next 1 to 2 years. As I move over to cost savings, events is a really interesting one, and it's becoming a very strong topic right now around should we hold events? Is it appropriate and sensitive to start with events? How do we handle virtual events? And that may be as simple as internal events to start, but eventually it's like, I've always done a silent auction. How am I going to recover that money? I've always held a gala, or some kind of event that's generated a lot of donation revenue. How do we move to an online or virtual type event? I've seen some really creative and innovative ways to do this, and I think in some cases people are reaching out to marketing groups and different things that maybe have some experience in this. But I think starting to look at how to do that. The surprising side effect of holding virtual events is actually a cost savings. It can be very cost beneficial to move to a virtual type event. You're not renting space in some cases, you're not renting entertainment in some spaces. It really just depends on the event you're holding, but it is something that you can look at in terms of still capturing as much revenue. I'll tell you a quick little local story around this that I think may resonate with some of the folks on this call. Is that the Mennonite Relief Sale, they typically auction off quilts. If you're from this area, you may be aware of that in the New Hamburg area. And they usually auction off around 100 quilts. And they've gone to full virtual online auction this year. And they're gaining so much more attention because the ability to have it virtual is bringing a lot more people to the event and allowing for those hopefully the event hasn't happened yet, but hopefully drive up those revenues for them. So it's really interesting how that organization took that one event and moved to a virtual very easily, and we wish them the most success with that. I mentioned the office space requirement. This is going to be a really challenging one for a lot of not-for-profits. They may have office space, and it is probably one of the higher items on their expense sheets. And as we move to sort of the social distancing and the requirement to have everybody in the office every day, I think we've all proved to ourselves that we can work remote now, and that we did it relatively quickly and maybe not so eloquently, but we're probably refining that. It may actually turn into a cost savings that we can reduce the footprint of our office space. Not suggesting we need to get rid of it entirely, but it may be that you can lower your footprint and get that cost of rent down, and still have a space for people to meet face to face, but in a little bit safer and more physically distancing opportunity. So something to consider there. Digital versus manual. If you felt any pain and suffering going through the transition to remote, access to information, being able to make informed decisions, I think it's going to be important for you to move to some digital transformation in order to help yourself be more cost effective and get things done quicker, and maybe in some cases with less resources. And then just looking at your overall resource and volunteer capacity can save you money. As you move to making these transformations, you may find that the amount of resources that you need may be less than you think. As we kind of rethink revenue opportunities, you're going to rethink your donor strategies. You're going to think about different events that we talked about in the cost savings there. You might be thinking about how and when to go to market. Another example I use here is that during the COVID-19 the COVID-19 pandemic, as it started out, everybody stopped advertising. Like it was like overnight, everybody pulled their marketing, whether that be in the not-for-profit space or otherwise. And then we started to see some trickle back in where there was a lot of sensitivity around that. And it was really focused on thanking our frontline workers. It was around, being very compassionate to what people were going through. Now you're starting to see that people are looking towards marketing, and we're seeing the first trickle of asks for support and help to get the recovery going back. And I think that's something that you have to evaluate within your own space to see if that's the right time. Okay, so and then lastly, I just wanted to talk about digital strategy. This is really going to be, pushing forward within our space. In the not-for-profit space, a lot of times organizations, they lag behind a lot of the other industries in terms of technology, and for a lot of good reasons. There's cost related there. There's, the adoption through the resources that we're using. And sometimes it's whether it's really necessary or relevant. But as we move to the world that we're going to see post COVID-19, we're going to see that this push to digital transformation is become, the most relevant change that we're going to deal with. And that means that to be viable and operational, you're going to have to start looking at using technology in a little bit more day-to-day fashion to stay viable. And we've seen it along with the influx of online ordering and curbside pickup. We've seen it around collaboration tools. Certainly seen it around e-commerce. You almost can't pay cash or check for anything anymore. You have to be able to do it online with a credit card or a debit card. A lot more self-serve type tools around portals and things like that that are going to be more relevant to maintain your base. So what are some of the success factors on financial recovery? Well, we know cash is time, so having access to cash and the more that you can take advantage of keeping it in your pocket for now is better. Certainly there's a balance there to being a good business partner with the organizations that you deal with, but it is important to manage your cash flow. Managing your workforce is really, really important. As I mentioned, those key resources are going to be very important to you as you move forward. Do an organizational assessment, sort of know where you're at, and then look for strategic opportunities. With that, I'm going to just move into a bit of a conversation around digital transformation and why that's important to your path to financial recovery. I will make these slides available, or the recording will be available, because there's a lot of information here that I won't go into full detail on, but I want to make sure that you had the information in your hands. So what's the purpose of a digital transformation? Well, it's to offer insight to help with your digital transformation outcomes. So that sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but it's really about what do you do now versus what do you do moving forward, and how do you understand where you're at. So the relationship between digital transformation and financial recovery is really about building a capability and capacity to respond to the new way of doing things. So as I mentioned, there are some transformations that are going to happen within our world and our culture that we're not going to have any control over, and we're really going to have to either decide to adopt or become not viable. It's really interesting if you take a faith-based organization, and I've seen and heard of different transformations where if we go back to the traditional envelope type scenario or cash collection, within a faith-based organization, the transformation is moving now to where they'll actually have a tap, like a debit machine tap at the back of the organization, or they'll go into recurring payments for a more of a tithing type situation. And so that's a complete digital transformation that that those organizations might have to or be forced into going to as it becomes, non-compliant to maybe receive cash in those situations. Um, Improving your ability to tell your story across multiple touch points. This can be social media, it can be commercialized reaching, it can be reaching your constituents in the method of communication that they are most comfortable with. We know that there's generational differences in the way that they like to communicate. I thought I was really cool being part of the Facebook generation, but when I talk to my kids, they don't even look at their Facebook account anymore, and they've moved on to things like Instagram or, heaven forbid, TikTok. But those touch points are they all start as a sort of a personal touch, and they move more and more into a business touch. So, Facebook has become very relevant in small business, especially, and so knowing how to tell your story and be able to do that in a digital format is going to become very important. Um, Achieving growth, your expanse and reach across whatever geographies that you want to be able to reach and that are relevant for your organization. The best and almost only way to do that is through digital media of some sort. And then lastly, it comes down to the digital impact of your operational efficiencies, and knowing how to manage cost and save time and money by using digital initiatives to help you make decisions or to be viable and get access to information. So as we know, as we look at what to do now, again, there's a lot of information here, but there is no silver bullet. It really comes down to best practices. You have to ask and understand, how do you perform your jobs? Where's the pain points? What takes too long? Are you able to make decisions with the information you have available to you? And then can you provide that information back to your stakeholders? And this really points back to something called digital maturity. And when we talk about digital maturity, it takes into consideration a couple of things, right? It's how well is your organization leveraging technology as part of its strategy and operations. So it can be as simple as the collaboration tools that we mentioned, or the ability to take online donations or payments. It might be as simple as being able to communicate to your constituents through email or social media. But it can also be, do I have the right operational tools in place to reach? Do I have the right data access or analytical tools to be able to tell me and help me forecast how I can better run my organization the most cost effectively, and to reach the right constituents and reach the right audience. It's really important, and we've seen some really cool things come out of digital at a grander scale that might be far beyond some of the size of the organizations that we're dealing with here on this call. But we've seen artificial intelligence start to be able to predict, somebody who might get cancer, or now they're looking in certainly into COVID-19 and how you can predict the different streams and things like that. So it can be brought down to a much smaller footprint. So, I'm asking you to think small and dream big a little bit, but there's definitely a lot to the digital maturity, and you have to sort of think about what it is that's going to help your organization. Digital optimization is a really important piece in this as well, because a lot of times you have the technology within your own organization, but you may not be leveraging it to the capacity that it could help you. And so looking at what are the business processes around the operation or the technology can help you to leverage that digital optimization piece. We've seen it quite often where people, invest in a piece of technology, but their resources don't go through the change management to transform to using it, and they therefore use all their manual processes around the technology, and it doesn't end up saving them any time at all. Take the time to invest in understanding what your technology you have in place is capable of and how you might be able to leverage it more. So in the context of digital transformation, you have to assess how you're performing your jobs, but I want you to really think broad, and it's not just about, your financial QuickBooks or whether you need a bigger tool there. It's really more around, how am I doing my fundraising? How do I know who my constituents are, and how do I know what my retention model looks like? Can I predict what my revenues are going to be? How do I communicate with my constituents? Are there some that prefer different modes of communication? Do I have a secure platform? We talked about collaboration. That can be as simple as, do I have an ability to hold an AGM or a board meeting virtually, and the outcome of that may be that I'm getting better attendance and better collaboration within the discussion that needs to happen, and therefore voting ends up being faster and more efficient than waiting for a quarterly board meeting to make it, any kind of large decision. Certainly any kind of service delivery models have to be looked at and make sure they're productive and they're safe. And then your digital marketing strategy. So continuing down the path of the digital maturity, it's really about also being able to respond to the information that you're receiving. It's one thing to say that I'm going to start collecting data in a digital format, but if I don't know how to use it or to evaluate it or to make decisions with it, it becomes, almost inundated with information. There's a couple examples of organizations that have done some digital transformation, but I'm going to take the Second Harvest one. This actually happened long before COVID-19, but they started to evaluate the food donations that they were receiving in a digital format, and they started to trend. I got more turkeys around Thanksgiving. Was I getting enough protein every week, or was I getting enough dairy? And their goal was to try to predict when they might get certain types of food, or even to go out and solicit for certain types of food so that they can provide a balanced diet based on the Canada Food Guide to different food banks and shelters that required food. And they used data analytics to do that, to the point that they started being able to predict ahead of time how many people they'd be servicing within a geography, what types of food that they would be able to send, and prepare the actual locations for that delivery. So it really helped them be more efficient in their route optimization as well. So it was a really cool story, something to look up at sometime if you are browsing the internet. So as we move on here, again, I mentioned there was a lot of information here, but we wanted to give you a lot of information around what to do now. We talked about talking to your stakeholders and making sure that you're executing on your mandate digitally. This often opens up new and exciting revenue streams that you maybe hadn't thought of before. Much like the Mennonite relief sale, the expectation is that they're going to get larger donors from doing it virtually than holding that auction live in a facility. And they may not have thought that in the first place. They may have always thought that, you know, part of their mission was to have that auction and have the people there. But this might be an opportunity for them to expand. As we look at different types of organizations and what the services are you provide, you know, we've seen people jump onto the virtual therapy sessions in you know, like a social services type of capacity, but have they really captured you know, captured the experience for both parties, both the therapist and the recipient? There can be some enhancement to those digital strategies around how those sessions can be really proactive and beneficial. And maybe once you know, once things go back to face-to-face meetings, they may find that they have a better ability to schedule in virtual sessions, or maybe they even handle more because they don't have the transition time. So you might see some ways of increasing capacity there. Lastly, I want you to think around digital transformation as part of part of your future and a necessary part of your future. But I don't want you to overlook the point of making space for innovation. I've probably seen more innovation happen in the last 6 to 8 weeks than I've seen at any other point in my career. You know, I've been in technology, as mentioned, most of my career, and I've seen a lot of innovation. I've seen a lot of things that have made an impact on the world, and I've seen things that have just been, you know, slow to adopt. But if we keep that open mind and that allow for innovation from our resources within our organization, you know, hold some meetings that allow them to just be a think tank and think how your mission might expand, how you might have different revenues. It's really important for you to think about that and allow for that innovation, because I think you might be surprised at what people's minds are going to and how they're thinking outside the box more than they ever have. I've got a note here about the superclusters, and I just want to bring that up in case anybody doesn't know. But again, long before COVID, the government had initiated something called the superclusters, and these are innovative think tanks to allow people to bring projects forward and receive funding from the government to increase or move the needle forward on different industries. And there are 5 or 6 different industries there that they focus on. But it's definitely something to look at, is to share the benefit of having a think tank. Maybe it's like-minded organizations pulled together to find some way to develop something that will help with the particular section of the industry that you're working in. So what do you do to move forward and evolve your organization? The best thing you can do is to build a roadmap and just kind of strategize around the digital transformation. This is really about bringing those things we talked about: how you perform your job, how do you make decisions, how do you add value to your mission and to your stakeholders, and how do you drive innovation. Put those things down on paper, understand what your priorities are and why they're important to you, and then try to build out a roadmap there. There's certainly organizations that can help you with that if you need some help, but a lot of organizations are able to at least get the front end part of this pulled together. Keep in mind, one of the things that we've learned about digital transformation is it's not just about technology. Technology is often not even the greatest challenge. It's more about people and process, and trying to allow them the time to transform and to manage the change, and to make sure that they're part of the process. Give them time to experiment and adopt, and technology will become part of what they embrace. So just to kind of summarize, you know, you want to take the stage of ideation, you know, think about all the different pieces that you need to solve your problems, qualify them, make sure they're going to be viable, and that your organization can handle them in the digital maturity. Evaluate the impact of your decisions. You know, are they going to be cost saving? Are they going to move your mission forward? Are they going to help, you know, just keep your business continuity? and then provide an avenue for experimentation and scale. So certainly look at innovation, allow resources to have a think tank, think about where you could grow to and how you're going to scale up to that. So I hope you've enjoyed this information. I always feel like it's a lot of information, but I sometimes think I could talk forever on this topic. So I want to make sure I've left enough time to take some questions. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Great, thanks so much, Kelly. So as Kelly mentioned, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into the questions box in your control panel. And we do have a couple of questions to get us started. Kelly, what do you think are the best practices for managing sponsorships moving forward? So when not-for-profits and charitable organizations are having to change how events done, how can they convey value to sponsors moving forward?
That's a really good question, and I know that there's a lot of people exploring this right now. Is the idea around the sponsorship, where we typically would either have advertising on our materials, we'd have them, sponsor either a meal or something like that, and the value to them was their advertisement again. So we have to get strategic and innovative around how we can put their names forward as sponsors when we're doing online events. One of them is offering, somewhat of a breakout session that may be a video about that particular sponsor. It may be about branding around the visuals that are in the event, but certainly some outside of the box thinking is going to be required there because it's a key element of what helps us run those events.
Great, thank you. And many organizations in general, but not-for-profits and charitable organizations are managing through this current pandemic and trying to figure out, what the immediate future looks like for them. I think as any organization continues to manage through this, we need to keep in mind that we probably should be preparing for potentially a second wave or if there's other pandemics in the future. So what are some tips that you might have for not-for-profits and charitable organizations in preparing for maybe future similar situations?
Yeah, I think the first thing is I would evaluate how painful it was the first time, and I know that's a little bit hard to think about, but if you were really caught off guard in terms of being able to work remotely or even to keep your doors open during this particular crisis, we have to understand that, unfortunately in the world that we live in, there is likely to be a second wave, and there is a high potential of other types of crisis like this. So we have to make sure that, as I mentioned in the slide deck, that some of the decisions we make to react to this crisis are not just temporary, and that we're making good, sound judgment calls around tools that we might be using to allow us to be safe and make working remotely part of our day-to-day activities. Saving costs in other ways to allow for that digital movement is going to be important. Digital is just something as not unfortunately, it's actually fortunately, but it's hard to move to that if you've been typically a little bit slow to adopt. Thinking about having to go digital is a little bit scary, but I can assure you that we all pivoted very quickly into the remote and digital world when we had to. And I think if you're prepared, that pain and suffering will be a lot less going forward because it'll be something that you've adopted as the norm.
Okay, great. Another question. So for many small not-for-profit organizations, the challenges to go digital are pretty insurmountable, or they can feel that way. Yeah. Is there a pathway that you can suggest to ramp up the knowledge and implementation of going digital?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. Really understand what you need. And then try to look a little bit into the future, but don't try to bite off more than you can chew, because you'll end up failing, and then those are dollars that are gone and that you can't recover. So we don't all have to transform overnight into these modern, highly digital organizations. We have to pick and choose where we fit. So the remote workforce piece was one that we got thrown into, and and you may have managed with things like some of the free tools like Zoom, or Google Hangouts, and there are others, or you may have found that they did the job, but they were not really conducive to a business environment. And so looking at tools that are a little bit more sophisticated, Microsoft Teams is one of them, where they provide you a lot more of a wrapper than just a video chat solution. And that's just one capacity, but you may find that forget the video chatting. I can talk on the phone and I can do what I need to do, but I can't get access to my financial data, and therefore I can't even make a decision of how many people I can bring back. So if you think that's your key priority, then look into the different tools in the price point that you think is relevant. And certainly there's lots of advice out there. I mean, I'm happy to always point people in the right direction if you feel you need some advice in that area. But it is about picking your priority and not going too far. I would like to just kind of highlight another option for you that you may not be thinking about, and that is that we're seeing a high uptake on shared services. So what that means is if you have the ability to have one platform and share it across a couple of organizations that are like-minded potentially, you can save a lot of money. The platforms today the licensing is designed differently. It really more on a per user basis and less about the entity. You can segregate information in a shared model so that you're not seeing each other's information, you're just sharing the technology. Those are some options that are available, and certainly if you're in a chapter type organization, talking to your sort of, I use the term loosely of head office, but talking to the corporate level of the chapter organizations and about shared services it's a model that's been talked about a lot, but not clearly mandated. And if you start to think about cost savings under that strategy, it could be really beneficial to the smaller end of the chapter organizations.
Okay, great. I think those are all of our questions for today. So Kelly, I really want to thank you for your time and sharing your expertise with us today so that we can help our not-for-profit and charitable organizations through this difficult time. To our attendees, as I mentioned, you will receive a follow-up email. There will be a link to this recording in that email. And again, I'd like to thank everybody today for joining us.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.